I'm Professor Peter Knight of the University of Manchester, and I'm the author of the book Reading the Market: Genres of Financial Capitalism in Gilded Age America. I began really with one central question, which is how did the market come to seem to be the answer for everything? And related to that was the question of how are we in a situation where up to 50% of Americans are now invested in the market in some shape or other, primarily their pensions, and yet they are either deeply distrustful of the market or they just don't know much about it. The specific starting question for the book was a historical question, which is this puzzle. In 1900, only 1% of Americans were invested in the stock market, and yet there was a huge explosion of popular interest in it. So why the difference between those two facts? There are three kind of short, easy answers, but then there is a longer answer, which is what the book is addressing. The three easy answers are that the minimum trade on the New York Stock Exchange was 100 lots, which meant it was a $10,000 minimum entry. The second answer is that there were other exchanges that don't show up on the official statistics. And the third answer, one of the most important answers, is that there were a raft of bucket shops, which were primarily betting houses in which people bet on the rise and fall of stocks and shares. However, even these three facts don't explain the profusion of popular interest in the stock market around the turn of the 20th century. There were a whole bunch of novels, short stories, investment advice manuals, brokers' newsletters, newspaper columns, illustrations, cartoons, and magazine articles. And this is what I looked at in the book. So whereas earlier in the 19th century, reports on stocks and shares had tended to be confined mainly to professional readers, in the Gilded Age, this popular culture of finance I've been examining came to really matter to the general public, who began to buy it in large numbers. And what it in effect constituted was a vernacular epistemology of finance, a folk form of financial knowledge. So in effect, the argument of the book is that Americans became emotionally invested in the market before they came to hold actual investments. So this popular culture acted as a form of imaginative investment, almost like fantasy football. And I want to suggest that it paved the way for the future mass participation and democratization of the stock market. This popular culture of finance fueled the emergence of a daily culture of market watching as ordinary Americans began to anxiously watch the market as a barometer of national mood and indeed their own personal fortunes, even if they didn't actually own any shares. And this culture, I would suggest, is still with us today in many forms. First of all, quite literally, some of the techniques of stock ticker tape reading that were developed in the late 19th century are still being promoted today, still being sold as valid techniques, even though for the main part they're completely hokey. We also have the notion that the market is God, or that the market is a skittish horse, or the market must be appeased. That fundamental attitude is really what the book is about. The book's organized thematically rather than historically, and each of the 5 chapters deals with a different mode of representation. It's a work of interdisciplinary American studies, and it brings together a focus on financial journalism, but also American literature and visual culture. And it proceeds by detailed readings of particular case studies. So the first chapter is on market reports, and it compares reports in the New York Herald, a daily newspaper, Harper's Magazine, a weekly publication, and also the society gossip magazine Town Topics, part advice columns, and part gossip columns, these market reports suggested that financial trading followed economic laws on the one hand, yet at the same time, they suggested that price movements were often dependent on insider cliques or a personification of the market as having whims and moods and opinions, a personality, if you like. The chapter actually in detail tells the story of Town Topics, this quite extravagant gossip magazine that combined financial gossip with society gossip. The second chapter explores the connections between a range of how-to manuals designed to instruct and entice investors on the one hand, and on the other, the stock ticker's seemingly objective reporting of financial data. And these new supposedly scientific modes of stock market prediction involved charts and diagrams, and they set themselves up in contrast to folk forms of stock market knowledge. But actually, they tended to incorporate many of those elements rather than superseding them. So there was a turn to abstract and impersonal numbers, but there was also a continuing reliance on personification. The chapter tells the case study, in particular, of Jesse Livermore, one of the notorious stock operators of his day. The third chapter is on forms of visual culture that attempted to render visible the increasingly abstract processes of finance. And this is a development of work I'd done previously on the Show the Money exhibition. Before the 1870s, the stock market was a literal place, best observed from the viewers' gallery of the New York Stock Exchange. But after the invention of the stock ticker in the late 1860s, the stock market becomes increasingly a placeless abstraction, a deterritorialized space, where the market happens simultaneously, not just across the nation, but indeed increasingly across the globe. It's almost like what the science fiction writer William Gibson described as the internet, a form of consensual hallucination. The chapter deals with the contrast between images of panicked crowds and lone ticker readers. It discusses the architecture of banks and stock exchanges, and it also discusses the modelling of price fluctuations on charts and even weird hydraulic contraptions designed to educate students in the working of the economy. So in effect, it's looking at the way that abstraction was coupled with personification in these ways to try and make sense of the stock market. The fourth chapter is on the confidence trick and other forms of insider information. It deals with Herman Melville's novel The Confidence Man, but also the novels of William Dean Howells and Edith Wharton. And what I argue is that these writers explore the connections between the parlours of Fifth Avenue and the dealing rooms of Wall Street. Both operate on the logic of insider trading, dealing with shared secrets, being in the know. And thus they make apparent the continuing importance of the rhetoric and the reality of personal connections in a seemingly impersonal market. The final chapter deals with conspiracy theories that promise to reveal who or what was ultimately in control of the market. It looks at cartoons and muckraking investigations, and also Frank Norris's novel, The Octopus. And the argument is that despite the acceptance of the concept of an abstract market, reformers hunted for conspiracies of powerful individuals. So, for example, J.P. Morgan and other titans of finance argued that their potentially unethical behaviour was merely cooperation rather than collusion, control rather than conspiracy. But I want to suggest that business apologists and muckrakers alike have focused too much on the power of lone individuals. But actually, some of the best writing and illustrations of the period tried to find a way of representing the webs of interpersonal connection of crony capitalism. So, the ultimate arguments of the book are that the seemingly abstract depictions of high finance were legitimized through a surprising persistence of both the concrete and the personal. And the argument is that the emergence of this deterritorialized and disembodied financial marketplace was neither simple nor inevitable during the Gilded Age, when large industrial corporations and investment banking came to define the American economy. Rather, this brave new world of impersonal and abstract finance was challenged and complicated by an enduring preoccupation with individuals, personal intentions, and the social connections of high finance. And that, I want to suggest, is not just something that applies to the Gilded Age, but continues to be a problem today. And one of the conclusions then of this book is that the market, the very idea of the market as a self-regulating, self-desiring entity, was conjured into being by this popular culture of finance that seemed to depict the market as a neutral and objective fact. And so the project's broader aim is to historicize and naturalize the myth of the rational market. And this, in effect, provides a broader history of the story of neoliberalism, the idea that the market knows best, the idea that the market is something that is larger and greater than any possibility of control.